and also help them see that life is about enjoying the process of the pursuit of our goals and dreams versus just obsessing with getting immediate results.
Welcome to Latinx Can, a podcast showcasing Latinx professionals who turn their dreams into realities. I'm your host, la doctora Jenire Flores Delgado, and today I'm here with María Angélica Peña, an industrial engineer who seeks to have a positive impact on her community by helping them to better manage their time and energy. And she's here to tell you, si se puede, my friends, si se puede. María Angélica Peña, welcome to Latinx Can.
Thanks, Janire. So happy to be here today.
I'm so happy that we reconnected. It's been a while, but it's been really exciting seeing you again and catching up with you. Of course, nobody else knows you but me. So how about we start by talking a little bit about your story and where your story begins?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you that it's good to reconnect and kind of see where our lives have taken us. But yeah, to provide a quick background, I was born and raised in Bogota, Colombia, and moved to Florida with my family when I was about 12 years old. Similar to many immigrants, my parents, my dad being an engineer and my mom being a doctor in Colombia, they had to start from scratch in search for a better future for our family. In a way, I feel like that is when my story, building up to where I am today, begins. Witnessing the struggle and sacrifice, but also the determination and hope that things could really turn around to build a better life, quickly became my fuel and motivation to make their decision to leave our extended family, their careers, and our country behind worth it. It almost became my duty to make them proud and make the whole sacrifice worth it. Fast forward to today, that drive is what motivated me to be the best I could and also to successfully move through school, through college, and into a professional career.
I guess it's a matter of perspective, right? But that is part of what being the sons and daughters of immigrants is. You know, you see how many sacrifices your parents have done, and here is, you know, the land of opportunity. What are you going to do with that? You know, so it's part of it. But you've certainly taken advantage of that opportunity. So we met at the University of Florida more than a decade ago when you were pursuing your bachelor's in industrials and systems engineering. And then eventually you got a master's in industrial engineering from UF as well, right after, one right after the other. And one of the things that you shared with me before is you applied to UF because sort of like people around you were talking about it, but you didn't really know about the process of applying to college and what that was like. So can you share with us a little bit of how you found out all this information and how you made your path to college?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you bring this up because I vividly remember those days. As I mentioned earlier, while my parents did go to college and have their degrees, it was not here in the United States. And that completely changes the experience. My parents, in many cases, I think parents in general, become our natural role models and our mentors. And whether we realize it or not, we do model after them and are influenced by their advice. So in the pursuit and decision of going to college, it was simply not something my parents could provide guidance. In terms of things like the application process, which schools are the best, how and where you should apply for scholarships and all that stuff was just not something my parents could kind of guide me through the path. And so this is where I would share my first piece of advice, which is twofold. Number one is to surround yourself with people that share this, similar ambitions. And number two is to make sure you have role models that represent an example of who you'd like to become. Because in my experience, it was exactly that that made a difference and enabled me to actually, let's say, take that first step and start going through the path. I was surrounded by like-minded individuals that knew the goal was getting into college in this example and at that time. And together we helped each other and figure out the how to do it. So getting the right guidance from mentors, or as simple as older friends or siblings that had already gone through that experience, being proactive and asking for that advice. I think it's a complete differentiator where you're trying to kind of pursue what you are, trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I think what you mentioned there of, being proactive, asking for advice, don't be afraid to ask for help, right? Because I think sometimes we think, oh, I know it's happened to me many times, and like, oh, maybe I'll just annoy this person, or like, maybe I've already asked too many questions. But if you don't ask the questions, you're never really going to find the answer easily. You can find your way, you can struggle around, but it's not necessary. You don't have to struggle, especially not now in this time of, open information. So just DMing somebody and asking them a question can really make a difference, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in general, people are more willing to help than what we think. It's like you said, it's probably our own limitations and maybe fear, or we just feel shy that we just are not proactive and reach out. And this applies not just when you're trying to go to college, but even now in any sort of like new venture or new thing that you want to try. If you have those people that are a role model or in some way represent the knowledge that you're trying to gain, you miss absolutely nothing by just asking and just kind of seeing, okay, what could I learn from this person and how might that help me, or how can I modify that advice to fit my particular journey.
I think you have siblings, right? Were you the first person to navigate that path here in the States? And were you able to share that knowledge with your siblings?
So I have an older sister and a younger brother. My sister's older by 2 years, so she did have to go through the process before me, which was helpful. She chose to go to a university, let's say, near to where we lived. So it was a little different when I chose to sort of take off and go, what I would say, like away from home. So in that way, it was the first time, to say, okay, well, not only do I need to apply for college and, do all that, but also first time sort of I have to find my own apartment. I have to figure out, services, just sort of like adult stuff. And so in that sense, I was, let's say, the first. Of course, the things that my sister had gone through definitely helped so much. And then for my younger brother, by the time he's, about 6 to 8 years younger than I am. So by the time he was in this process, thankfully, both my sister and I think, had plenty to share and guide him through.
I had a similar experience that my brother is 10 years younger, and he could have stayed at home. He started university in Venezuela, and we said, no, we saved a little bit of money, so maybe you can try and come here and live with me and then go to community college. He started a community college. But just having that knowledge, like I had a friend who went to community college in College Station, so like I knew his experience, and I'd be like, oh, Xander did this, so you have to do this. Like Xander found a job, you can find a job. Xander found scholarships, you can find scholarships. And just like telling him, go look here, go find here, go somewhere. I think that made a huge difference, especially for somebody so young.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I was so happy that in this case with my younger brother, we were able to help, because it's just like you said. I mean, both my sister and I were able to figure it out, but there are definitely things that it's like, I wish I had known this. I wish I had known that. So I think we were able to, share that advice with Mateo, and I would say he's, doing it better than we did, because he had us, let's say, as that thing I'm saying, which is a role model. And so a role model doesn't need to be some like famous person or someone, like completely unreachable. It could be as easy as just an older friend, an older sibling. So back to that advice is like, surround yourself with friends or with people that are trying to achieve similar things. And also find out who around you has maybe gone through that experience already, because as we were just talking about, chances are they'll be happy to just help you through it.
So, one of my goals with this podcast is to help people learn about potential opportunities, like we're talking about, in order to help them turn their dreams into reality. Were there any specific opportunities that you took advantage of or that helped you make your bachelor's and master's degrees a little more affordable?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would, let's say, just not focus so much on affordability, but just general experience of what it is going through, a degree, whether that is undergrad or master's. And my point here is that there are always opportunities waiting to be taken advantage of. So that's sort of like not the issue per se. It's more a matter of knowing what it is that you want to achieve. What is it that you are looking for? Because this brings me to my second piece of advice, and that is you need to understand and have clarity around what it is that you need or what it is that you want and how might you get it. So in the context of your question, this can be translated to I want to get a taste of what working in a company is like before I graduate, right? So like, is that my goal? Is that something I'm interested? Just let me experience what it is like to work. Because if that's what you want, therefore you'll focus your efforts on an internship. Or is your need or desire to, I want to reduce my student debt as much as possible? Then you would focus on getting scholarships or even finding a job while you go to school. So it sort of depends what you're looking for or what it is that you need. Now, it doesn't mean you can't, let's say, kill many birds with one stone, right? You could potentially get a paid internship, but there are some cases in which you can't quite bundle all the things that you're looking for into one. And this is where it matters to really understand what it is that you want so that you can prioritize accordingly. So this is when we need to make decisions based on what we value the most and what we're seeking. And there's no right or wrong answer. So you just need to be honest with yourself about what you want. And we're each kind of like in our own experience, in our unique journey. And then once you realize that, then going back to the first advice, again, surround yourself with people that are in search of that, or find those role models that can guide you through it. So if it's, again, corporate experience, then try to find people that have gone through internships or that are working at a company. If it's, you want to just look for ways to make your, let's say, degree more affordable, then can you find a part-time? Can you, find out what scholarships are available? So I think the number of opportunities that exist are endless. It's just you do need to focus on how are you going to spend your time, because you could honestly just spend hours looking at all the things possible and not get anywhere. So what is it that you're trying to get? That would be my advice here.
Yeah, and one thing that I would say also is like you can have a plan, but maybe also be flexible with your plan because the opportunities might not present exactly like you have sort of pictured them in your head. I remember when I was in college, I somehow learned that people did research, and somebody in my chemistry class said, "Oh, I'm doing research with this, and this person." And I was like, "Oh, maybe I need to do research, right? Like, so I'm going to try that." And I found the TAs in my organic chemistry class sitting on a bench like by Plaza de Americas at UF, and they were just sitting having lunch. And I just approached them and I was like, "Oh, you guys are the TAs for Dr. Miller, right?" And they're like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Well, I was wondering if you needed somebody to do research, an undergraduate researcher, because I'm looking for an opportunity." And they're like, "Well, let me talk to my advisor, to Dr. Miller." And he said yes. And I started doing research there. I wanted to get paid, but Dr. Miller didn't have a budget to pay the undergraduate students. Some professors do. So maybe if I were to do it all over again, I would find out who were the professors who actually had the budget so that I could sort of apply for a job there, right? Anyway, what I was able to get was research credits for my honors degree. So, one way or the other, there are ways of sort of killing two birds with one stone in that you can take advantages of those opportunities. But I agree with you, like, understanding what's the goal and maybe how you can continue to fill that goal, even if you have to be flexible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you say to, have a plan and be flexible with it, because it's in that kind of like in the pursuit of that goal, many things show up in the, on the road, right? Where you're like, oh, well, I didn't realize there was research, like in your case. And then it opens up a whole new door. But had you not been proactive to go after the thing you thought you wanted, this research opportunity wouldn't have come up. So the point here of being proactive is absolutely important, but also, come up with what we were saying, like, what is it that you're looking for? Then when you do that, be open to opportunities that might come up, because who knows if that completely changes the course and that completely changes like where you want to take things. And that's absolutely fine. It's actually, I think, part of the exciting thing in life, that it's like you might think, oh, this is where I'm going. But then because you opened up yourself to a new experience, then you're like, okay, let me refine my plan and kind of go in a new direction.
That's what college is for, right? Like, even though you have an idea of who you want to become, like the experience, like you were saying, is as important as having the degree at the end of the day. So that's amazing advice, I think. So you graduated with your master's degree in 2012 and began working full time in corporate America. And you've been doing that for maybe about 8 years, right? So you have had various roles throughout your career so far. And although they have helped you achieve your goals, you noticed there was something missing. So tell us a little bit about the journey that brought you to this realization and the process you went through to identify what was lacking in your life.
Absolutely. So this question brings us to my life now, right? So it's kind of like the part of the journey that I'm currently on. We were just talking about how in that plan or in that pursuit of your goals, things come up and things appear. I think that's sort of what happened to me. Because just like you summarized, I've been extremely happy and proud of my journey so far. But about a year ago, I did start feeling like something was missing. Like I wanted a little bit more out of life, but was not necessarily in my work life per se. I think I would characterize it like I needed something with a bit more purpose behind it. Something where I had a direct impact on others and that was more in line with things that I truly enjoy. And this desire was not something I planned for. It was truly a feeling that started manifesting itself, and I felt I needed to address it. So, you were asking about the process I went through to identify what was lacking in my life. And it was really more of a self-check. It was a self-discovery process. And we were just talking about identifying what you really want and going after it. I think for me, I was clear on that as I went from school to college and into my professional career. But once I was inside, let's say, corporate America, in this example, I sort of felt like I was just going through the motions. Like, okay, I made it into a great company, which, extremely grateful for, right? Like I can continue to learn and, have different experiences within the company. And these are all great things, but kind of like, so what? Have I checked in with myself to reassess if these are still my goals? If there might be other areas that I want to explore. And this pause that I gave myself is what I would say was my process to come up with the what was lacking, and therefore could begin the process to pursue it.
I understand where you're coming from, because this is where you're coming from is also part of the reason why I started this podcast, right? For me, it was, one of the things that I really liked about one of the jobs I had is that I could do a lot of recruiting, and I would go to universities and I would talk to people, and we would be part of trying to give tools to graduate students and undergraduate students to sort of ace the interview and get hired. And that's like, I guess, the one thing that I really, really enjoyed about my job. And then I quit that company and I was going to come to a different job, and I knew that that was not going to be there. Honestly, I wasn't that excited about that other job that I was going to, but I still needed to pay my bills, like I still have to earn money. And so I said, well, how can I actually keep myself fulfilled in this other job? It might not be the job that gives me that, but how can I do that for myself? And that's when this idea of the podcast came about, because I sat down and I said, well, what am I actually good at? I'm good at many things, but what am I good at that I actually enjoy as well? And I said, I like talking. I like giving presentations. That's something that I enjoy putting the time in, and I like standing in front of people and talking. And so maybe I can use that to do something. And then I was listening to a lot of podcasts. So I was like, oh, maybe we can do a podcast. So that's how that happened for me. I want to learn a little bit more about like what steps do you take to actually understand what that what was.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one thing I wanted to point out just as you were speaking is that I was saying earlier, when you're in like school and college and then you want to go to, a company or whatever, it's all kind of pretty, feels almost like a recipe, like of course there's variation within what you want to do, but it's almost pretty standard. Then once you start working, you really are in control. I mean, you're always in control of what you want to do, but it really is like a time where like, okay, the script ends here. Like, what is it that you're going to do? So I think that's when, people like yourself, like myself, we start feeling this like, okay, I got here, but what else? Like, what else can I do? Where am I good at? Like all these things. So, your question of how did I sort of find out what that what was is, I started just kind of doing an inventory of what are the things that I'm good at and what are the things that I enjoy. So you totally touched on that point, that you were saying in your creation of this podcast. And there was a little bit for sure of, I think, like imposter syndrome behind it, because at one point I'm like, well, I think I'm pretty good at like planning and I think I'm pretty good at organizing. But part of me felt like everyone's good at planning and everyone's good at organizing. Like I don't really stand out. So there was a little bit of just kind of taking that power back and like owning my strengths. So that was a little bit of the work that I had to do to say, no, this is a differentiator. This is something that I do well. And while, let's say, maybe within the scope of my company, a lot of people might do it well, when you kind of come outside and, let's say, see the world, there's a lot of people that don't have that strength where I could, let's say, help. So that was part of the process. I would say one was sort of recognizing my strengths and owning them, like being empowered to say like, yes, I am good at this. And then number two, just realizing that what I was missing was sort of like have the feeling that I was helping others, that I could in some way, have a positive impact. So this two sort of merged into like, okay, how might I use my strengths, but also be able to help others so that I do feel that sense of, let's say, realization or purpose in, making a difference for someone.
And the result of that journey is a project called Café con Plan. It's a community where you share your knowledge and strengths to help others achieve their goals. So what is Café con Plan all about?
Yes. So after that journey that, we've been talking of identifying what it is that was missing in my life, is when it manifested and actually materialized into what today is Café con Plan. So in a very summarized way, let's say that the outcome of my journey, like I was saying earlier, was the realization that I wanted to help and connect with others. I had a desire to create a community and then also have a desire of having a direct impact. So things we just kind of were talking about. And a way that I could do it, playing on my strengths and passions. And I want to use the words passions lightly because I think there's this kind of romanticized idea of what a passion is. And for me, a passion is just something that you truly enjoy, that it's something that you love learning about or love doing. And in this case was to help people become more intentional with their time management and be able to achieve their goals by being productive, but also by being very aware of what and why they're actually pursuing those goals. So it's not just being on that autopilot of being productive and doing more just for the sake of doing more, but actually doing more of the things that you truly want. And like you're completely, let's say, aware of why you want to achieve that. So in short, Café con Plan, which today is really an Instagram account, at Café con Plan, is a personal productivity hub, is how I would describe it, where I share tips, experiences, actually offer like one-on-one mentoring sessions. But the goal is to help others get clarity. That's one word that I would emphasize, get clarity around what they want to help them organize themselves better, and also help them see that life is about enjoying the process of the pursuit of our goals and dreams versus just obsessing with getting immediate results. Because that is one thing I see a lot is like, okay, well, I want to do this or I want to achieve that. And we get so focused on like instant gratification and like so focused on like, I want to do it, but I want to get the results now. And there's so much beauty in just the process, right? Like even what we're talking about today, we've been talking about like our stories. Yeah. That story becomes our process. And I think we both take pride and actually like we've been smiling throughout, right? Because you remember with like love and kindness and like all these things that were part of that experience. So same way that we treasure what our experience has been so far is the same way we should treasure what we're living today and not rush to, okay, get whatever result we're looking for. The results will come, but part of that is just sort of like just enjoying this process that we're going through.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it's hard to do when people just get busy, right? And then right now, everybody, I think I was mentioning this to you as well. It's like I see everybody around me just being really, really busy, and I look at my time and I'm like, maybe I have like too much extra time. I'm like not being productive. Like I see that as well. But one thing I would say, and I think this is maybe part of what you do at Café Con Plan as well, is like I have put very strict boundaries on like my time as well, unintentionally. And for a long time I thought I was just going being selfish. Now like I listen to Brené Brown and she's like, oh, put your boundaries and you do this and you do that, and I'm like, okay, I'm doing this right, you know. But that was like very unintentional. I cannot claim credit for that, you know. But I do say, you know, I finish work at 5 o'clock. You know, if I have to one day and I really, really have to sacrifice, I would do it. But I was very, very intentional not to do it lightly so people don't think that I can do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as a society, we fell into this trap of kind of equating productive to being busy. And so definitely one of my missions, if I could call it a mission in Café Con Plan, is to completely change the perception of what productive means, which is not, you know, productive doesn't mean that you're just busy all the time. It doesn't mean that you always have to be doing something. You know, being productive, and that's why I kind of rephrase it to like intentional productivity, is just doing more of what makes you happy and doing more of the things that are important to you. And that might be resting. Yeah. I mean, resting is completely important and crucial to being productive. We can't just like, you know, we're not machines. Yeah. We will burn out if we just continue to work. And so that's definitely one of the things that I sort of attempt to portray through Café Con Plan, which is like, you don't have to be busy all the time. You just have to be intentional about how you manage your time. And also, I love what you said about boundaries, because learning to say no is a very key, I think, part of being intentional. You know, because we can't do all things. We can't be everything to everyone. And so there's times where we definitely need to put ourselves first. Yeah. And that might mean, you know, saying no to a friend, or that might mean saying no to volunteer in a certain project, or to do something, you know, extracurricular, or whatever that means. But that might be the right answer for you in that time. Not just kind of saying yes for the sake of saying yes because you're maybe afraid of how you're going to look, you know, how you're going to be perceived. So there's a bit of, I think, personal empowerment in saying that that's not aligned with what I want to do. So this brings me back again with so important to have clarity of what is it that you want. Because when you have clarity, then it's so much easier to say no to the things that just don't fit within that, you know, within that timeline or within that bigger plan that you have for yourself.
Yeah. And you talk about, you know, maybe how people will perceive you, and you can't control how people perceive you, right? Like that's going to be their perception. Some people will understand and some people won't. And we're talking about this. I understand boundaries, and I have a friend who has very strong boundaries. And, you know, like I would ask her sometimes to do or get on a phone call or something like that. And she'll say, you know, in 3 weeks, I'll have time. And I'm like, man, I mean, I don't think you're that busy. But that's my initial perception, right? And then I'm like, well, she must have something that she's working on, or she just needs the time to just be with herself. And it's not my time, it's not my prerogative to dictate what she's going to do, right? And so at first I'm like, I feel a little weird and I do like sort of judge, but then I'm like, okay, check myself. She's the owner of her time and her energy. So she'll come back, she'll come back to me, and I should be okay with that.
I love that you say that you check in with yourself before reacting, because it's natural that we all are going to react a certain way. And so it's definitely important to kind of move away from judgment, because to your point, we don't know what is it that people are, living, or maybe, like you said, they might just need time for themselves, and that's completely okay. But I do think that as we start building these boundaries, people around us start, let's say, like respecting those boundaries. And so then it's not like, Maria in this case doesn't want to do this, or she always says no to that. It's just like, we know what her priorities are, and therefore we understand and respect her for it. So it's definitely a bit of a process. I think this is one that definitely comes up a lot in the mentoring sessions, which is, I overcommit myself, and I have a hard time saying no, even if it's to like social events, right? So it's like people that might overcommit to like 3 different dinners like in the same night, and it's like, it's okay to say no, or it's okay to I guess live with the fact of the whole FOMO, like fear of missing out. You just need to be clear, and I keep saying the word clarity and clear, but I just think it's so important, of what you value, and then start making choices around it. And the right people will stay around you, and also people will start to understand and respect you for it.
Ser, hacer, y mantener. Those are the 3 pillars that you have identified as key in order to create intentional plans that can help us achieve our goals. So why don't you tell us more about each one of those pillars? Let's start with ser.
Yeah, absolutely. So ser, which means being or to be, it's pretty self-explanatory, but is one that many of us ignore. And that is, as I think I've said many times now, to be really self-conscious and self-aware of what it is that you want and why. So I think we've touched on this, the clarity and what do you want and why do you want it. To me, that's part of this first pillar in Café con Plan, which is ser. Because if we don't start here, then we're really just living life by going through the motions, by doing what everyone else does just because it's what we should do. So for example, think about how many people feel pressured about following a certain path because their family, culture, or society expects it. Whether that is a certain degree, whether it means getting married, starting a family. I mean, there's all these like norms per se. And, those are big decision examples. But the example could be as easy as simple as, are you going to CrossFit because you really want to exercise in that way? Or is it because everyone is doing it, right? So are you just jumping on a trend because everyone's doing it? Or is it something that truly aligns with, the person you want to become? And so that is the difference. And that is the key in this pillar of ser. Are you being true to yourself, or are you just conforming with what others have imposed for you? And because without being clear on this one, the rest won't fit naturally and will potentially lead to those feelings of emptiness and dissatisfaction. I mean, when we're going through the motions, as I said before, when we're doing things and, it feels like we're busy, it feels like we're productive, but yet we still have that feeling of like emptiness or dissatisfaction. To me, that's a flag of you're not being true to yourself. Like you haven't really revisited that pillar of ser. To make sure why are you doing the things you're doing? Like, are your goals really things you want to accomplish, or are they things that you think you need to want, or you think you need to go get? And that's the difference for me.
And I think when I think about the immigrant experience, this is something that I hear more and more. It's like, our parents, we talked about this. They left their own careers to come here, and they had to start from zero. But so many immigrants want their children to become doctors or lawyers or engineers, right? Which we advocate for those careers because they do give you a lot of opportunity, but of course they're not for everybody. And that's where this comes from, right? Understanding, is that really a choice that you made, or is it because your parents push you to doing it? And maybe that's why people have so many midlife crises.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you said, it's a perfect example. Sometimes we have these expectations, many times come from parents, from family. And so, to your point, it is with good intentions that parents want, let's say, for us to be a doctor or a lawyer. But it doesn't mean we have to do that. I mean, we need to kind of do some introspection and see, well, what's going to be practical, because I do think there's a piece in our parents' advice, which is they want our stability and they want sort of like our success, but we don't want that at the expense of us feeling miserable. So just in general, it's just important to think, okay, why do I want this goal? Like, why am I spending my time the way I'm spending it? And at least finding some areas in your life that you're doing because you're like choosing to do them gives you that sense of control. And I think just empowerment, like we were talking about earlier. We both have jobs, right? And our jobs are great. I mean, like what you said, hey, they're what lets us kind of have the lifestyle that we have today. Mm-hmm. So definitely there's so much gratitude for that. But maybe it's not the most exciting thing, right, in our day-to-day, but we found ways to make our life exciting. So it doesn't need to be all like, fun and games and everything you do is awesome. It's not about that. It's about how can you be intentional about how you spend at least some of your time so that it's aligned with things that truly make you feel happy and make you feel, fulfilled.
Yeah, I think that's key, right? It doesn't have to be your entire life that you invest into this, but but definitely find time to do the things that really matter, because that's what it's going to fuel you through making the things that you don't really want to do. Like when I did gymnastics, I hated running like so bad. I cannot run to this day. I cannot run. I hated it so bad. But just knowing that I would do after the running, I could do the things that I really liked about gymnastics. Those were the things that, help you get through the things that you don't really like.
Exactly. Yeah, that's perfect example. Because there's some things that we just kind of have to do that enable everything else being possible. So kind of having that perspective is really good, because I definitely don't want to kind of send out a message of, drop everything you're doing and then just, do the one thing that you like. It's about finding that balance, and finding at least a few blocks of time that are dedicated to things that truly fulfill us, like you're saying.
Okay, and so the second pillar is hacer. What is hacer about?
So once you're clear on who you want to be, then it's time to hacer, or to do, right, in English, which really means to create a plan so that you can achieve what it is that you want. So this is where dreams and desires get translated into a plan, into a when do I want this and how might I break it down so I can achieve it. So it almost becomes of our map to reach the destination that we just defined in the prior pillar. So an important one here is also to be kind to ourselves and just be realistic of how much we can take on, because we are experts in overcommitting. I think we were just actually talking about that. And also we're experts in asking too much of ourselves by wanting to do like so many things at once. So back to something I said earlier, we need to let go of the obsession of seeing the results and need to start focusing on enjoying the process of the pursuit of those goals. So in this pillar of hacer is really, how might you take that vision, that thing you want to do, that you're clear on, and make it into, call it a map, so that we can get there.
This is where, when I understand Café con Plan, this is where I think you could have, or you have a lot of impact in where you really help people identify, maybe not what the steps are, but maybe how you can find those steps, or maybe how you can make those steps manageable. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in the mentorships, I always do a quick check of like, are you aligned with your ser? like with your being pillar, because like I said earlier, if that's not clear, then that's where we should start. Otherwise, we're just, we won't get, let's say, the results that we're going after. Let's assume that's been, check. Yes, that's fine. Then yes, we move on into like, okay, we need to focus on the things that can be done to achieve, all the things that you want. And part of that, like I was saying earlier, is that prioritization of things that you want to do. So it's learning to prioritize, it's learning to sequence, because what happens is, what I see a lot is that we might know what we want, but we have no idea how to get started. Like we have no idea. We might have, let's say, 5 different projects in our mind. And then it's like, well, how do I do 5 different projects at the same time? How do I lay it out? How do I break it down? So it's a lot about breaking it down into more, reasonable steps and laying out that sequence. What needs to happen first? What needs to happen next? If you had to choose, let's say amongst these 5 hypothetical projects, how would you choose? Because they can't all have the same importance, because it goes back to, we can do anything, but we can't do it all at the same time. So we need to be mindful of how are we really going to, create this order, create this kind of map or timeline of the things that we're going to be focused on. Also, so that once it's created, then people can have that, number 1, clarity, and number 2, focus to know, how are they going to start actioning this next month? They now have that view to say, okay, awesome. I now have that, plan of action, let's say, to go after it.
And I think this idea of prioritization is so important, because I think in like 4 years of work, the one thing I've learned is like, what are the priorities? And like, once I understood, like if I have 10 projects, what are the priorities? And when I go to my manager and he asks me, or they ask me to do many different things, I go, okay, so these are the other 5 projects that you also asked me to work on. Help me understand what's the priority here, right? And that also helps me take a little bit of the load off, because when they go and tell me, why didn't you work on this project? It was like, well, we sat down and we agreed on priorities, and that's what I shifted my focus on, because again, I cannot do everything at the same time.
Yeah, and I love that you bring the example of, let's say, work and having a boss that, let's say, gives you the things that need to be done. Because when it comes to personal productivity, you're your own boss, right? Like you're the one telling yourself what you need to do. So imagine in your example, if your boss just said, no, they're all equally important, go do it all. As an employee, you're going to be like, that's not possible. Like, I can't work on all these things at the same time. You need to give, you need to help me out and help me prioritize, right? Because like you said, we can't do everything at the same time. So think about it in the same way. If you're your own boss and you're telling yourself to do these 10 things because they're all equally important, then you're not being a good boss to yourself, right? So I love that analogy, because then if you think about it that way, then it's like, you're right. Like, what are my priorities? Like, which of these 10 things or 5 things matters the most? Not to say you're not going to get to the others, but you just need to start sequencing the stuff so that you truly are working on what you deem to be the most important. So that's a lot of what we do in this kind of pillar of hacer, which is, how do you break it down? How do you lay it out? How do you really prioritize? What's the sequence? Does it feel like you're asking yourself too much? I think if I had to say, like, what's kind of like the most common thing that comes out of these sessions, and especially in this pillar, is we shave off some stuff. Because all of us, which is great, we're all ambitious. We all want like a lot of things. But the feelings of guilt and overwhelm and frustration come when you're like asking yourself for so much and you can't achieve it. And it's not because you're not capable. It's just, you're, again, going back to what we were talking about, you're just asking yourself too much. So in these sessions, what we do is, okay, let's really prioritize so that it becomes a much more realistic and actionable plan.
And that also helps with actually achieving something, because then you get demoralized because you try to do all this many different things and then you achieve nothing, right?
Absolutely, exactly. And the kind of like the number one ingredient for motivation is progress. And so when you start seeing progress because you've broke it down, because you've made it, more digestible, then you get motivated. Well, then you're like, oh, wow, I'm doing great. Like I'm achieving the things I want to do. So then it almost like fuels you to continue to progress versus like this massive, intimidating list of all things that you want to do. And again, you go to that feeling of how in the world do I start?
And so the last pillar is mantener, right? So it's like, keeping all of this momentum going. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, exactly. So, kind of like review, it's like, okay, once you know what you want to, who you want to be, why do you want it, what do you want? Then you go and create, your map, your timeline, your sequencing, you break it down. You have this, let's say like this beautiful plan, but then it comes time to like, okay, you not only need to get started, you need to actually keep it up, right? You need to maintain. So that is what mantener means, to maintain. Maintaining our habits, maintaining our actions that will continue to move us forward on this map that we've made towards our goal. Because you can plan all you want, right? And then planning could actually become an excuse to not get started. People just stay in this like planning mode forever. You can have the best map ever, the best plan ever, and attempt to get started multiple times. But if you don't maintain those small actions to reach your goals, you'll be back in square one. So notice that I don't focus on just getting started. I think there's a lot of maybe like schools of thought that it's like, get started, which I absolutely think is key to get started. But I also want to say it's not just about getting started, because you can get started, but then give up after one day, right? It's about getting started and continue to go after that initial step. So the key for me is to rely on continuous small steps in the right direction. So sometimes we all feel like we need to take this like massive steps. We need to do like, this major kind of changes or achievements in order to feel like we're progressing. But when you do just like small steps frequently in the right direction, you'll start seeing the effects. It's like, the book, The Compound Effect, that's exactly what it's about. It's like minor improvements day after day will add up, in the long run. So this is what mantener is all about, is emphasizing on what are the small steps that you can be taking to make progress. What habits can we create to move us closer to who we want to become? And how can you really make this a lifestyle versus like a one-time activity? It's not about like, okay, I'll exercise once and then, stop. No, it's about how do you bake that into your lifestyle? How do you make planning part of your lifestyle so that you continuously are progressing towards what you want to do, and actually going back to the point of you're actually enjoying that process.
And I think this idea of, building habits is so important, because it's building a habit is so that you make it, that you don't think about it anymore, right? Like it's like when I did gymnastics, it was like honestly a habit just to show up at the gym, and I had a coach that told me what to do. So like really all I had to do is just show up, like it's like putting all of these things together, and then you would see the progress and you get motivated. And even if you don't want to do it, you still go to the gym because that's what your body is telling you to do, right?
Yeah, exactly. Habits. I mean, our day-to-day is filled with habits, right? Like whether we realize it or not, we all have habits, right? Like we all have like habits when we get home, the way we wake up, like maybe the side of the bed that you get out of, the way, like the order in which you take a shower, like all these things, we're all very particular. It's just become so automated that we're not even conscious of that anymore. So the goal when we're trying to kind of build habits that are beneficial to ourselves is how can I repeat it often enough so that hopefully it becomes a little bit more automated, so that, like you said, when you don't have it, then you miss it. It's like maybe in the time when you were doing gymnastics, like the day you didn't go, it was weird, right? Because it's like, oh, wait, like something's off. Something's like not part of my routine per se. So yeah, I think part of mantener is, I would say, not just the habits that we build, but also the bad habits that we eliminate, right? Because it's how are you taking, again, small continuous steps to become the person you want to become?
So we've talked a lot about planning, right? So we have ser, hacer, y mantener. Those are the three pillars. And now, like, people may be wondering, like, you're an industrial engineer. Maybe that's part of, what you do in your daily life as an industrial engineer, but how do you gain the knowledge and, the skills that now you have to be effective at planning and also at achieving your goals?
Yeah, I think this is somewhat of a blend as to how, these skills or habits have become part of me and actually have become a strength, like I was saying earlier. I think on one end, the degree, so industrial engineering, which focuses a lot on increasing productivity at companies, factories and such, effective time management, optimizing processes, etc. I think that definitely has been a factor into the knowledge I have. But that's been limited to like the raw definition of productivity that we talked about earlier, which is, doing the most in the least amount of time with the least amount of resources. And so while I get the intent of why that might be important for like a company or like a factory, like maximizing throughput or production, all those things, I don't love that definition when it comes to personal productivity, like we were saying earlier. And Café con Plan is about personal productivity. So yes, I love the, let's say, optimization perspective and skills that industrial engineering gave me. But I think the blend comes from just my own kind of self-learning in things that I enjoyed. So for example, I've read a lot of books on personal growth, mindset, emotional intelligence. Throughout the years, I think I started reading that sort of book when I was in college, actually. And I think that's helped me shape the definition of personal productivity into intentional productivity, like we were saying earlier. And the way I've sort of not come up, but at least defined the three pillars, that are the three pillars in my opinion, right? This is not like universal truth, but just sort of how I interpret intentional productivity. So yeah, I think it's been a mix of, yes, a bit of my background, but then just a lot of my own curiosity and where I spend time, which has been like books. And then also just interest and enjoyment of the topic has led me to read books on, habits, time management, articles. So I continue to learn. And I think that actually ever since starting Café con Plan, I've actually started kind of honing in my skills and becoming better myself. So not just for, let's say, for the account or for, my mentees, but actually I definitely see an improvement in myself in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. So remind us again where we can find all this information and where we can reach you if anybody's interested. I know that, we've been talking about ser, hacer, y mantener because the account is in Spanish, but, even those who know English and want to learn Spanish could go there as well.
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. So right now it's, it's an Instagram account. So it's at Café con Plan. We might just link it here on the description so you get the spelling. And in there you can, it has a contact button, goes straight to my email. So cafeconplan@gmail.com, also through direct message. It's a fairly recent project that I'm just enjoying so much. So happy to answer any questions, not just about like mentorships, but just any questions you might have about personal productivity, about all these things, or even just anything that you might be curious after listening to this podcast. I would love to connect.
Absolutely. And so now the fun part of the podcast, what are your top 3 things to do or places to visit that you would recommend people to do, if they come to visit you and you're not around?
Okay, yeah. If you came to Houston and I wasn't here to show you around, I think my recommendation would be to rent a bike and ride it on the White Oak Bike Trail. Mm-hmm. Because it has several pit stops along the way, like cool bars and restaurants where you can grab food or a drink. And then it also has just some of the cool, you'll be riding through like cool neighborhoods and has more of the green areas of Houston, which, Houston's very kind of concrete city. But this bike trails will actually take you through some of, I think, more pleasant views. So that would be one activity I would recommend. Also, I'd probably suggest checking out just restaurants or bars in the Montrose neighborhood. I feel Montrose has a pretty cool vibe. It's like old, but it's older, not old, it's older, but hipster and just very cool. And then I would just say to check out one of the many breweries in town. In Houston, there are so many breweries. And as you can get from all my recommendations, I think Houston's all about places to eat and drink naturally. So it's not much of a landmark city as, maybe a New York City or, I don't know, like DC might be. But there's definitely lots of cool neighborhoods, restaurants, bars to explore. And you can always go to NASA, like if you want to go to something, like very landmark. But if you ask me, what are the suggestions that I would give you as coming to the city, I think those would be ones that I myself would enjoy.
María Angélica, thank you so much for joining us in the podcast today.
Thanks, Janita, so much for having me. This has been really, really fun. And, I appreciate just the space you've created here to be able to help others.
Thank you for listening. If you want to put a face to the voices you just heard, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at LatinxScan. If you have questions or feedback, you can email us at latinxscan@gmail.com. And if you want to support our project, please leave a review. We have made it easy for you and added the links to the show notes. That's it for now. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and remember, unidos somos más.